Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about job hopping. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, how often should you job hop? Is it about trying to stay for 2 years before moving on? Well, yeah, I would say so, but I'd like to add some nuance to my answer because the 2 year line, or I would like to say between 1 to 2 years, is usually the sweet spot. It's a pretty good estimate, or like it's about that time. And the reason why I say that is usually because when companies are hiring software developers, when you look at somebody's CV, one of the things that you're looking for is indicators of something. As I like to say to the more junior profiles that I work with, your CV is basically a record, and in a sense, a little story, and that story is told to whoever's reviewing your CV. Now, you can't fully predict what people will think about your CV because you don't really know who's doing the reading. But one thing that is always true is that if you have employments that are of a at the very least of a significant time period, that is a good thing because it gives an indicator to that you had the time to join a company and the company had ample time to evaluate your performance and they deemed you to be good enough to stay within the company. And the contrast to that, or like the opposite of that, is that if you have a lot of employments but they are under a very short time period and you seem to just hop very often, that is potentially something that people will see as a negative thing or a red flag, that maybe you're getting fired or like you're so forth and so forth. But I will touch on why like there are exceptions to this rule. So 1 to 2 years is on average what an average employee will look at as that's a decent amount of time for you to not go, to be established within the company. That's what I'm going for. You have had time to as a company to evaluate the person, and you would have gotten rid of them way before like the 2 year mark or something like that, if it turns out that yeah, this person wasn't a good fit. When you on the other hand are in a company for just a few months or like something similar to that, usually people would consider the first few months to be, depending on the profile now of course, that's like the evaluation period, around 6 months is the average-ish before you start feeling like, yeah, this was a good investment or a good hire. The exception to this, as I mentioned, is if you do contract work, or let's say you're a freelancer or something like that, you just do short time gigs. In those sorts of situations, it's not that uncommon to see shorter periods of time than a year or 2 years or something like that. And so, in that specific scenario, if you have that on your CV, then it's usually fine because you have a reasonable explanation as to why you've been there for less than a year, for example. The thing that is usually the red flag is if, let's say, you were a full-time hire, you're not a temporary hire of any kind, you're there to basically to work within that usually it's a product company or something like that. Well, if you've only been there for 6 months and then you move on and that keeps on happening, then that's probably going to raise some questions as to what's going on. Can't you commit? Is it that you're unproductive? Things like that. But if you're a consultant or a freelancer, yeah, you probably will get a question or two about it, but it's not going to seem weird to most people. So the thing that is also very important to mention here is that it's especially in the earlier days where this is a factor more than later on, and I'll tell you why. So, as I was saying, the CV is usually read as a bit of a story from the perspective of the employer, and so if you have just a few years in the industry, like you're a mid-level or you haven't been working for years and years and years or something like that, and you have all these short-term hires, well, that tells one story. But on the other hand, let's say that you are a more senior experience and you've been working for quite a few years and you have a few short-term hires, but you also have longer periods of time that you have worked in certain companies or so forth, then that sort of, in a sense, it balances it out a little bit, because the thing that you as the interviewer or the company who's hiring, like what you're trying to figure out is is this a safe investment to make? And the thing that you use usually when you look at a CV is, as I said, it's the social pre-selection thing, right? If others have invested in you, then it seems feasible that you have been doing a good job. So if you have a few like hops here and there, and you have a few longer periods of time, maybe you worked for 5 years or something like that at one or two companies, then the story is that yeah, you had a few shorter hires, but you've also had a few long ones, and that usually gives that all important sensation that I keep telling you guys about. That's basically what everything is about in the interviewing stage. It is about the gut feeling of the person doing the evaluation, and if they read your CV, what you should ideally have is a CV that tells a story where they feel comfortable thinking that yeah, this seems to be a person who's been around the block a little bit, and they seem to be working a decent amount of time at the very least at each place of employment, right? And so that's the main thing that you should consider when you're doing job hopping. But I also like to tell people that the way to think about job hopping or switching jobs and so forth is to one part look at your CV and like to sort of think about that, but it's also about how fast do you acquire knowledge. So as you gain steam in the early days, you will probably be able to work in the same place for quite a few years before you've learned quote unquote all the things that is to learn. The faster you get at absorbing knowledge, the more experienced you get, the quicker your absorption of domain knowledge and experience and so forth will happen in each company. So if I take myself as an example, it won't take me more than a year to practically learn everything there is to know about a place of work. Due to the fact that I've been doing these things so much that it's basically a repetition of most things. Like almost 60% is identical to everything I've done in some other place, right? And the 40% is usually fairly quick to absorb. And so for me, the job hopping might be valuable to do even more frequently, and I can afford it if I wanted to. I usually don't, but I hope that you see what I'm going for. If your intention is to job hop due to that you want to find a better role or something like that, the rule that I usually apply is, I've said this in a few other videos to you, the goal is to ask yourself, are you in the place that you should be? That's what I do with myself. I always take a review about 6 months ish to figure out, am I still learning things, or is there a job offer with a better salary or something? Usually I try to suggest to people that when you're doing a job hop, you should do it for one or two reasons. Either because there's a better opportunity, like a role that will teach you more, or you will get a more, you know, you will get knowledge that you don't have right now, things like that, or you're getting a higher salary or something. You should be gaining something. But on the other hand, if your job hopping is due to the fact of poor performance, or you're getting bad references and stuff like that, it's pretty important that you take care of those issues before you do the thing that I was saying, that you create a CV that tells a really bad story about poor performance in a lot of companies, rather than telling a story of someone who's just career hungry, because there's a difference there. If you're hopping because of new opportunities and new exciting projects, that's a good thing. That can indicate a very good thing for you. But on the other hand, if you have the other thing, well, that's a real problem. That's the thing that usually is well, you're basically creating a story where you might not even get any callbacks anymore, because your CV is basically telling the people who's reading it that you're incompetent. So what I want you to take away from this is that usually, yes, I would say that especially in the early days, it's usually a good idea to keep at least 1 or 2 years of reserve time at any given company, because, as I said, a lot of people read the CV as a story, and if you have a lot of very short time hires or things like that, it gives people a gut feeling about you, and that gut feeling may not be the only thing that they care about, but it is definitely something that is going to stack the deck against you if you don't have at least reasonable reasons as to why that is happening. As I said, if you're a contractor or a freelancer or something like that, then it's quote unquote understandable that you work a shorter period of time. But if you're a full-time hire and that keeps on happening over and over, that is, even for many people, a red flag. So be a little bit careful about that. And then, as I said, these things matter less and less. If you have a few longer hires on your CV, then you give people a sensation of that, yeah, he or she has at least had a few longer term hires. This seems to be like a good person to interview, because that's the thing you're going for, guys. Remember, the gut feeling is, you can't predict it, you don't know who's reading it and so forth, but it's about figuring out what is applicable to most people, and most people will look for social acknowledgement or social approval when they're looking at things, a person's CV or something like that. So if other companies have invested in you and you have quote unquote proven yourself in another company, it's very likely that the next person looking at your CV will go, okay, I've seen you've been doing 4 years at this company and 2 years here and only 6 months in that, but that's fine because those others seems to have been working out for you. Because making mistakes, that's fine. If you dot here and there that you only have a short time hire, it didn't really work out, that's fine if the bulk is pretty stable, good stuff. But on the other hand, if you have the reverse where it's all like really short-term stuff, uh, that's something you want to look at, because you want your CV to tell a good story about you. Have a great day.